One thing that I end up quoting a lot whenever I do a race review that contains a steward's decision, or maybe even a storytime episode that contains something like a banned hack that the teams have put onto their cars, is the FIA's rules and regulations. And believe me, they can be an absolute minefield to get through. And quite literally, 2 people have commented that they like how I do go and find the relevant rules in relation to X, Y and Z, and then tell you why a certain person got the penalty they got, and why it is what it is. Because what some of you might have seen over the last 12 months or so is more and more fanboys of particular drivers constantly crying that the FIA is out to get somebody, or that they've got an agenda, or that drivers with a certain passport don't get penalties. The absolute dullest arguments on these kinds of videos. British bias is the new "no you." And I said this after the Canadian Grand Prix, where all that stuff came up again because of the collision between Norris and Piastri, and then later on the stuff between Russell and Verstappen. Because Norris didn't get any penalty points for the collision he had with Piastri, but did receive a time penalty despite not finishing the race. But the weird thing is, he did finish the race under the FIA's own rules. 90% of the race distance was completed, so Norris technically finished. It's the fact he got a 5-second penalty that's a little bit, well, weird. And I will admit that. I absolutely will admit that, because it dropped him from last to, well, last. It just makes no sense whatsoever. But it's the fact that he got no penalty points that's getting people up in arms. But we'll get to all of that in a bit, because it ties in with what's been released in the last few days. And that thing is the mythical Stewards Guidelines, the piece of paper that they keep talking about that contains all of the guidelines for issuing out penalties. It's finally out in the public domain. This is a document that you hear about all the time, but nobody besides the stewards ever got to see it. Until now, that is. This document is like the Yeti. You know it exists, you've seen its footprints, but up until recently this document was shrouded in secrecy. Like mentioned, we know it exists. The FIA references it all the time, and it's been around for at least a decade, maybe longer. And this document is a sort of cut out and keep guide that the stewards have, so they can look at it and go, okay, this falls into this umbrella category. Then we have these subcategories, and these are the decisions we can hand out for these offences. Which is pretty cool. It's almost like a flowchart, or a script, or an easy access tool. It makes giving out decisions much easier and quicker, although it's not always going to be that easy or quick. We were all quite annoyed that the Russell and Verstappen incident at Canada wasn't signed off until about 3 in the morning UK time, because it wasn't as clear cut as George brake checked Max, as much as the MV1 clan tag dudes on Twitter wanted it to be that because, well, bias. The stewards had to take into account the claims of George, of Mercedes, of Max, of Red Bull, and check all the data. It does take time, as annoying as it is. Once the stewards had analysed everything, they said that the protest was unfounded and rejected Red Bull's appeal. It was lots of different bits and pieces, like safety car deltas and the fact that he was warming brakes and yada yada yada. But why let data get in the way of your blind fanboyism towards one driver? Now, just as a clarification here, I'm happy to debate the ins and outs of a particular incident, and I'm happy to have a discussion about it, but it only works if it's sensible. Just yelling bias at something because you think your driver can do no wrong just ends anything that might have come of that particular discussion. So what I thought I'd do for this video is go through some of the document and then use the guidelines to help explain a few case studies, some of the more recent bits and pieces regarding penalties that have happened, and see if we can understand some of the thought processes that go through the stewards' minds. And weirdly, I quite enjoy this stuff. I've done stewarding for esports leagues, both amateur, professional, and one run by a global car company, and I've done an FIA course on esports stewarding, with the certificate to prove it. So it's something that I do, weirdly, well, enjoy. I'll level with you here, it is so satisfying telling people off for driving like absolute amateurs. Yes, I know it's just a video game, but at the top level it is taken incredibly, and I mean incredibly, seriously. I'll also have a link down in the description to the full document, so you can have a read at your own leisure whenever you feel like it. And while the document is called Guidelines, there are some things on there that are completely non-negotiable, such as this one here. Receiving mechanical assistance, which will be things like a push start. Something that's been a rule for at least 35 years, because it's what Senna should have been disqualified for at Suzuka in 1989. It's also what Ukyo Katayama was disqualified for at the 1996 European Grand Prix. Senna was allowed to be pushed out of the way because he was in a dangerous place, but he was not allowed to be push started. The FIA dropped the ball bigly with that one, and it's still talked about even now. So what we have is the overarching offence, or the umbrella offence if you will, and then the sub-offence, followed by which article of the sporting regulations that offence breaches. Then you've got what happens if you breach this article in practice and whether you get penalty points, what you get in qualifying and any penalty points, and then the race and any penalty points. It's really easy to just call it up, find what you want to find, and then off you go, although you still have to do the relevant investigations. But it's pretty simple, really. And while the punishment for this specific offence is non-negotiable, some of them really are non-negotiable. Scrolling down to the pit stop section, one of these says that if you release a car in an unsafe condition during the race, it's a 10-second stop-go with mandatory in red letters next to it, or it's a team fine if the car retires. This could be something like the team putting a front wing on the car and then it falls off or something like that, or the car is pulled in because of the meatball flag and they send it back out with the suspension caved in or a piece of bodywork still flapping about on the side pod. Although this is just an example, obviously. But I think for the rest of this video, instead of just calling them the guidelines, I'm going to use the term that the race used when I looked at their article to see if they had a link to the actual FIA document. And that term is the menu. It's brilliant. I love it. And having the menu now available to us as just regular viewers of the sport, it might help things a bit. Although I'm not going to hold my breath. Because too many times in my videos I've explained things to the letter of the law for somebody to then completely disregard what has been said in those explainers, or to try and call me out on something that I never said, which is always hilarious. What it means is there is now a little more transparency in what is going on because there has been a lot of criticism and online chaos. This document has not been seen in the public domain until this week, and I think that the lack of access to this document is helping to perpetuate this whole bias thing. So let's look at one of those alleged bias moments, the 2024 Sao Paulo Grand Prix weekend, where people alleged bias against Max when he picked up the penalty in the sprint race, along with other claims that the FIA was doing its best to rig the Constructors' Championship in favour of McLaren and that the stewards are too trigger happy, and it's all Johnny Herbert's fault. If we scroll through to the virtual safety car section of the menu, we have the infraction staring us right in the face. In the FIA decision document posted on the 2nd of November 2024, the offence in question was a violation of Article 56.5 of the FIA Formula 1 sporting regulations, and Max received a 5-second time penalty and a single penalty point on his racing licence. If we want to be exact here, Max was 0.63 seconds faster than he should have been in the VSC ending phase before the lights went green. This when he pulled alongside Piastri to try and jump him on the restart. What this meant was he was ahead of where he was when the virtual safety car was deployed, and not because of the car in front falling back. So if we go back to the menu, we find the offence that matches Article 56.5 of the sporting regulations, the specific offence of exceeding VSC minimum delta time at VSC end. Then you go across to the race portion on the far right and see that if you are in the red for any amount of time, it's a 5-second penalty, and a single penalty point on the licence. Verstappen got 5 seconds and a penalty point. But like I said, I'll leave a link to the whole thing in the description box so you can read it whenever you want to. It is so easy to follow, it really is like a restaurant menu. So I hope you're seeing how all this works now. And now that we have the menu to hand, we can look at one of the biggest questions that came out of the Canadian Grand Prix this year. Where's the licence points for Lando for causing a collision with Piastri, while Max was given 3 for clanging into George at Barcelona? Well, I'm glad you asked, because this was the first incident that came to mind when I was looking through the document, and the one that had the most questions attached. Because when I did my Canadian Grand Prix review, even though I scanned the rulebook, looked at this, that and the other, I couldn't work out why Lando wasn't given points. I could only speculate. It's also something to be noted here that I thought the penalty was a bit weird in general, because Lando retired, despite what the rules say about 90% race distance and everything else that comes with it. In my own opinion, it was like he'd been given a warning without being given a warning. A warning, but they had to apply something because of what their own messed up rulebook says. Basically, Lando was an idiot, they had to tell him that he was an idiot, and basically went, "You ruined your own race, GG, better luck next time. You scored nothing while the guy you hit carried on no problem. Just don't do it again." So we have to consult the menu again, but before we do, let's have a quick recap of what the decision document said. The driver of car 4 was solely to blame for the accident, which is correct, and because the incident had no immediate and obvious sporting consequences, the stewards imposed a time penalty on Lando because of the fact that he completed 90% race distance, which I think needs to be changed. He didn't finish the race, I don't care what lap it was. Bringing up the Aidan menu again, causing a collision with no immediate and obvious sporting consequences, which is a violation of Appendix L, Chapter 4, 2D of the Sporting Regulations, before moving into the race column we see, reprimand, 5 seconds or 10-second penalty, or a grid penalty if the driver failed to finish the race. Again, the 90% rule says that Lando did finish the race, but I'll stop bitching about it. Next to those time penalties, we see the license points that can be dished out for this infraction. 0. However, the stewards can impose a maximum of 3 for this offence. Above that, we see the generic causing a collision offence, which carries a baseline 10-second penalty and 3 licence points, which is what Max got at Spain. At the bottom is the collision with deliberate or reckless intent category, which is a total of 4 penalty points, and if the stewards had decided that Max had intentionally drilled George, then that would have meant a race ban. I guess it's because both continued, so they put it in the other category, but at the same time, how long did Magnussen have to bait the FIA to ban him? I really do mean it when I say that I find all of this stuff quite interesting, how all the decision documents and the penalties in those decision documents line up with the guidelines in the menu. I also hope that you can see that there is method to the madness, rather than, Johnny Herbert is a dick. And Russell's penalty at Monaco can be analysed here too, leaving the track and gaining a lasting advantage, when he decided that Albon was driving too slowly and he cut the chicane, thinking, oh, I'll just take the penalty, I'll be far enough up the road to take it and keep the position. Doing so in the race is a 5-second time penalty minimum all the way up to a maximum of a drive-through, although 5 seconds can be given in mitigating circumstances, which is Lando at Austin last year. Lando was only off the track because Max put him there. It all lines up. Russell got his for trying to be clever. Lando got his because, yes, he overtook off the track, but the reason he was there in the first place was taken into consideration. So who authorised the publishing of this document? Well, it was none other than the president of the FIA himself. Mohammed Ben Sulayem has gone through a lot in his presidency. He's attracted and courted controversy multiple times per year since he took over from Jean Todt at the end of 2021, and there is still a massive amount of pressure on him from fans to quit his job, with many more quite upset that Carlos Sainz Sr. has withdrawn his bid to stand against Sulayem in the upcoming presidential election, which will happen later this year. Sulayem's reasoning for putting this document into the public domain was because he said that the stewards do this job voluntarily and that the decisions they make are all too often met with extreme and unwarranted criticism. And it's not often you find yourself agreeing with the president, because as we've seen with the 3 recent case studies of Verstappen in Brazil, Russell at Monaco and Norris at Canada, and I guess the Max at Spain thing as well, is that the punishments handed out fit what this menu says. Lando wasn't given a licence point because there was no sporting advantage gained. He was the only one to retire. But because this document wasn't available for anybody to read until a few days ago, the British bias claims began. But I'm not saying for a second that the stewards get it right every single time, because you only have to look at Australia last year in 2024. Why was Alonso given 3 penalty points for Russell having a skill issue? I mean, the stewards did say that he did something extraordinarily different into that corner and that made Russell crash. Yeah, I don't buy that one. But Sulayem hopes that allowing this document to be out there will help people understand the decision process that the stewards go through when determining which penalties get handed out for the different infractions. Although in some cases things like telemetry, extenuating circumstances and everything else besides will have to be taken into account, like the Russell and Verstappen incident at Canada the other week. And the F1 website actually published the other things they can look at, which include but are not limited to how the cars got into that situation, things like late braking, dive bombing, moving under braking and so on, whether the manoeuvre was late or optimistic, what the drivers could see, know or anticipate. Could the move have been realistically completed on track, and was there understeer, oversteer or locking? Did the drivers involved position or handle their cars in a manner that would have contributed to the accident, and what type of corner were they going into? And finally, what was the overall grip level like? Track temperature, wetness, tyre life, etc. But while we've only really concerned ourselves with the case studies, this menu, to keep using the term, does go into several other things. The racing rules are a big one, which was largely outlined just a moment ago with regards to various incidents that can happen, and the rules regarding what constitutes a legal and safe overtake on the inside and outside of a corner. And that's something that gets debated until the cows come home, because this guy's wheels were here, this guy's wheels were here. And I think it was Albon or Sites who said earlier this week that the rules being clarified on the menu means that the way of thinking is pretty much true. If somebody makes it to the apex first, then the other guy has to move out of the way. That's something that probably needs looking into. There's also been more clarification on the whole swearing stuff. The big debate on how many times you can say shit, fuck, c***er, m***er, and twat, and what penalties you'll get for it. The fines and punishment for swearing in press conferences have been lessened, and there is more leniency with regards to what gets said over the radio, and this has come after lengthy talks between the drivers and the FIA, but it's still not a perfect system. It has since been confirmed that drivers can swear on the radio because footballer, microphone, etc, but if they resort to using derogatory or discriminatory language, then that will incur a fine and other penalties. So you are allowed to exclaim, "What on earth is he doing?" but using ableist slurs or whatever, that's a no-no. There's also grid penalties for abusing officials, which I wasn't expecting to see, with most articles showing a picture of Gunther Steiner for illustration because why not? But then again, he did get into trouble in 2023 for calling the stewards laymen when he was pushing for stewards to be permanent paid members of the FIA and not volunteers. Basically, it's no different to slagging off the referee in football or rugby, saying the stewards are absolutely rubbish, don't know what they're doing, and are biased against you during a race will get you 5 seconds. Do it at an event off the track and you'll get a grid penalty. But the stewards are still allowed a lot of discretion. Some of the offences can be 0 penalty points, could be 3, it all depends on the situation, and how many times this offence has already been committed by that driver, and so on. So it all adds up, and there is now definitely a lot more transparency, but what do you think about it? Is it a good thing or not? Answers on a postcard. Well, Russell seems to think so. Transparency has been a hot topic for a long time, with Russell speaking up in the past about the fines that the drivers pay for various things, and wanting to know what that money is being put towards. But like I said, I hope it helps to reduce some of the knee-jerk reactions that people have to certain things, most notably the whole passport argument that seems to come up at any opportunity. But as we've now found out in this video, the punishments fit like a glove as to what's in the guidelines. Well, the menu. So then, a look at the FIA's penalty guidelines, or the penalty menu as it's been called, and whether some recent case studies were dealt with as they were because of said menu. If this has been an interesting video for you, then do leave a like on it so I know I did a good job, and for more from the channel, get subscribed if you haven't already, and also get that bell on too so you never miss out on anything else I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the mad lads over at Patreon who continue to support me at a more personal level, and if you want to help with the picture purchases or otherwise keep the lights on, there will be a link to Patreon down in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and other bits and pieces you might want or need to know. There's also super thanks if you want to top up my coffee cup, and memberships if you want to do Patreon, but without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been Aidan, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.